Welcome to 365 Christian Men, where every day we aim to inspire and encourage with real-life stories about men. October 30th, George Fox. In his diary, George Fox wrote that the Lord showed him that being bred at Oxford or Cambridge was not enough to qualify men to be ministers of Christ. Then the Lord let me see his love, which was endless and eternal, and that love let me see myself as I was without him. This rocked Fox's world, and for the next years, he prayed and read his Bible. In 1647, Fox worked as an itinerant shoemaker and preacher. In 1649, he interrupted a sermon in Nottingham and was jailed. His sentence was short, and the jailer came to believe in Jesus. After a sermon in Derby, Fox said that people should stop arguing about Jesus and start obeying him. For that speech, on this date in 1650, he was jailed for a year, and again the jailer found new life in Christ. At Fox's trial for this offense of telling the truth, he asked the judge to quake before the Lord. The judge may not have quaked, but he did label Fox and his companions Quakers. Here is his story.
When our enemies fall, kindness helps them to stand back up. In the 17th century, the Church of England, who were also called Anglicans, taught that only Anglicans could be saved. George Fox disagreed in public and taught that other denominations could be saved as well. This not only made the ministers angry, but made the government furious. They quickly tossed him into prison on minor charges of blasphemy, and even though he was a peaceful man, he ended up in the same place as criminals, the house of correction. Knowing God was with him, Fox accepted his sentence, but he wondered how he would be able to minister if he was in prison. Alone in the cell, cold and dark, Fox knew his stay would be anything but pleasant. Many inmates viewed him with a hateful eye. One person who treated him the worst was the warden, Thomas Sharman, who hated the things the preacher said. When Sharman passed Fox in his cell, the warden said hurtful things about the preacher, as if wanting to bring him extra harm. But Fox would not respond with cruelty. He wanted to obey God and treat his enemies with goodness, because that is what God led him to do. Day by day, Sharman taunted Fox, but Fox answered in kindness. He knew in his heart that God's love was more powerful than any man's hate. But one day, as Fox was walking around his cell to stretch his legs, he heard a dreadful noise coming from down the jail's hallway. He hurried to the edge of the door and pressed his face against the cold, hard surface to hear what was happening. The dreadful noises were coming from Sharman. Panic had overwhelmed the warden, and he battled thoughts that terrified him. He rambled like a madman, searching for some sort of relief. "I have seen the day of judgment," Sharman wailed, "and I saw George there, and I was afraid of him, because I had done him so much wrong and spoken so much against him to the priests and professors and to the justices and in taverns and in alehouses." Fox felt astonished. Had the warden dreamed about him? Had God made Sharman realize his mistreatment of Fox was a sin? Fox waited, curious as to what Sharman would eventually say to him. As night fell, the warden approached and entered Fox's cell. But instead of his usual taunts, he offered an apology. "I have been like a lion against you," Sharman began, his voice shaking with guilt. "But now I come like a lamb, like the jailer that came to Paul and Silas, trembling." Fox listened as the warden spoke with humility. How was it the man who had been determined to taunt him was now full of apology and regret? Surely God was at work. Sharman asked Fox if he could stay with him in the cell for a little while. Fox reminded Sharman that he was in control of the cell and he could do as he wished. But the warden wanted to make sure Fox was all right with him staying. Fox agreed, knowing as a minister he could somehow help, and they sat together as Sharman shared how he had been plagued with guilt over how he had treated Fox. Fox listened and ministered as the warden spoke through the night, and Sharman did not leave until morning. Though Fox was not removed from the prison immediately, he was granted some leave to walk a mile on his own. Sharman eventually confessed to Fox that one of the judges who had imprisoned him had also been plagued by guilt, and this was his way of offering Fox a chance to escape. But Fox remained in prison so as not to cause more trouble until he could be released legally. While there, he continued to minister to other prisoners and to local people who came to prison, including Sharman's own sister. Fox continued ministering in the prison for a year until he was released. God tells us in 1 Peter 3:9, "Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing." Think about people who have mistreated you. Here's a challenge for you. Take 5 minutes today and write out a prayer for each of them. When our enemies fall, kindness helps them stand back up.
Thank you for listening to today's story. Every day of the year, our hope is to inspire you with real-life stories of faithful men who have gone before us. Hebrews 12:1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Join us tomorrow for another story at 365christianmen.com.